Okay. Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. We are continuing with the life and the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, and specifically going through the book Keter Shem Tov, where the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov are compiled and arranged. And we have been doing this for a number of weeks, and we are continuing. Tonight, we have some super fundamental teachings from the Baal Shem Tov. I myself was quite excited to see certain teachings that heard many times, to see the actual source of these teachings. So tonight, we're going to start on the 28th Torah, Chaf Chet. And as I'm doing, I'm reading in Hebrew with a free translation. So it says, Nodeh ma shekatuv b'sefer Eitz Chaim. So the Baal Shem Tov comments on a statement in the book called Eitz Chaim. This is part of what's called Kitvei HaArizal, the writings of the Arizal. Inyan mitzvot hamila v'chashmal. There in the book Eitz Chaim is discussed the mitzvah of circumcision, mila, and the word chashmal. So first we'd ask, well, what's the connection of chashmal, which in modern day Hebrew is translated as electricity, but in the vision of Ezekiel, it represents a very high, elevated, transcendent energy called chashmal. And the two words that make up chashmal, chash means silent, mal means speaking. So this is the paradox of the speaking silence, the sounds of silence. And so the Baal Shem Tov is going to comment on the teachings of the Eitz Chaim. What's the connection between Mila and Chashmal? So it says, V'nira li la'albish ha'devarim, shezeh shayach ben b'Torah, ben b'tefillah, ben be'esek ha'mitzvot. So he says that what we're going to learn now is appropriate, is connected to, whether we're talking about learning Torah or about prayer or about doing the mitzvot. And then he brings the word chashmal. So the person giving this over, remember, this book was not written by the Baal Shem Tov. It was written by his students and students of his students. So the one who is writing this says, Kabalti mimori habesht, I received this from my teacher, the Baal Shem Tov, that this connection of Mila and Chashmal is the Sod Hachna'a Havdalah Pahamtaka. This is the secret of Hachna'a, submission, Havdalah, separation, and Hamtaka, sweetening. Now, this is a concept for those who have been following my teachings for years, know that this comes up all the time. This teaching from the Baal Shem Tov, and especially emphasized by Rav Ginsburg, that every process in the world, whether it's physical or spiritual, goes through the process of submission, separation, and sweetening, hamtaka. So here, the Baal Shem Tov is bringing it in connection with this word chashmal, silence and speaking. Shetzarich b'chol esek Torah, v'zeh sod chashmal. So he says that in any connection to Torah, we have to understand the secret of Chashmal. שצריך לחשות עד שמל וקורא את הקליפות. אז ימלל וידבר למתוק הדינים בשורשן. So he said, this is such a fundamental idea he's giving over here, is for those who are not familiar, so it's important that I just mention, so what is submission, separation, and sweetening? And how do we understand it as a process? Submission means submitting ourselves to a task, a mission, or a goal. Havdalah, separation, means making the constant types of clarifications and separations between what will help me get to my goal and what will distract me from my goal. We need to make separations, clarifications. Hamtaka means sweetening, that when we accomplish that which we set out to accomplish, that it turns out the way that we wanted it to. As we know, many times we have a goal. It could be to do something in 1 hour or 1 day or 1 year or 10 years. We reach the goal. The question is, are we satisfied? Is this what we had envisioned when we set out? So sweetening means the feeling of accomplishment, that this is what I wanted to accomplish, and the joy that comes with thanking God for helping make it happen. So that's the process of submission, separation, and sweetening. So here the Baal Shem Tov says that, and Rav Ginsburg expands this. Here he says in Torah, prayer, and doing mitzvah. But Rav Ginsburg says in everything, every process will go through these 3 steps. So how is it connected to Chashmal? So that's what the Baal Shem just explained. So I'll read it again. Shetzarich lechashot. First, we must be silent. We must submit ourselves with determination to reach a goal. Ad shemal v'koreta klipot, until we can separate the distractions, the klipot, or we'll never get to the goal. Only when we can break through all the obstacles, and that's connected to the word mal, as he's going to explain in a minute. Then we can speak. So here, and he says, and sweeten all judgments in their root. So here, the word chashmal has 2 syllables, silence and speech. So here he explains that there's really a middle step. And as he's going to explain soon, we'll see that the word mal has 2 different meanings. But I'm going to continue reading from this. Shehu soda tefillah should be b'shem rabo. And this is the secret of prayer, as the teacher of the Baal Shem Tov explained to him, and that was Achia Hashiloni. That the Baal Shem Tov had a heavenly teacher called, it was like a muse, Achia Hashiloni. The Baal Shem Tov learned from him that this idea of first in prayer, first one needs to be silent, meaning receptive, then to break through the strange thoughts, distractions, unfocused mind, until one could say the words of tefillah and sweeten all judgments. Lakach lahafrid memachshavato machshavot zarot. and through the step of separation, to separate from strange, distracting thoughts. And therefore, we'll be able to separate the outside kind of distractions from our connection to the Shekhinah during prayer. And then he explains like this. This is the key. Ulakach tevat mal sovel bet pirushim. And therefore, we have to understand that the word mal, as in chash mal, has two meanings. Two meanings. And if you remember in previous works, we've learned that virtually every word in the Torah carries two meanings and in many cases opposite meanings. So here he explains that Aleph, Dibur, first, mal comes from the word milah. A word in Hebrew is translated as milah, a word, which means speaking. Mi yimalel gevurat Hashem. Who will speak? Who will express the strength of God? Mi yimalel gevurat Hashem. So the first meaning of mal is to speak. And he says, but the second meaning is kritat v'havdalah, is this idea of havdalah. So before we read the end here, let's just review this so everyone understands. The Baal Shem Tov is bringing two of his most important teachings in this one Torah, and that is that every process goes through this three-staged development called hachna'ah, havdalah, and hamtakah: submission, separation, and sweetening. And we explained how we can understand that in a very practical way. The Baal Shem Tov connected it to prayer. At first, we have to submit ourselves to the obligation of prayer, that we have to devote however long it is. Morning prayer is around an hour. So we have to submit ourselves that is what we're doing now. Nothing is more important. But then we have to, that's the hachna'ah. The submission, the separation is all of the thoughts that could be running through our head while we're trying to pray. Everyone knows what that's like. And then once we could break through all of the klipot, all of the distracting thoughts, and just concentrate on the words of prayer, then those words of prayer come out sweet and can sweeten all the judgments. So therefore, chash mal, the Baal Shem Tov reads it chash mal mal. Chash, silent, mal, circumcision, separation. What is circumcision? The actual physical act is to separate the foreskin, to cut off the foreskin surrounding the male organ. It is literally separation. And then what is revealed is sweetening. And in circumcision, it's the crown of the male organ. So the Baal Shem Tov continues. And he just says that this is the secret of chashmal, shetzarich lachrit haklipot, that it's teaching us, it's really chashmal mal, that we have to cut off the klipot, the outside shells. V'achar kach mal, diber be'esek Torah v'tefillah, shehi havdalah v'hamtakah. And then we can speak the words of Torah and tefillah, and these are the two last stages of separation and sweetening. So, as I said, I was so excited to learn this because here we're seeing on the inside it's called in the actual text of the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, how he gave this over, and the connection between these three stages of a process, Hachna'ah, Havdalah, and Hamtaka, and the word Chashmal, which he interprets as Chashmal Mal. So this was a super fundamental teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, and especially the way that Rav Ginsburg uses it, that he employs this process in so many of his teachings. And as we commented at one time, this is very, very common that a certain teacher will teach over certain concepts, certain fundamental ideas, and it will be a string of fundamental ideas. But along the way, different people pick up on one of these fundamentals and makes it a very important part of their teaching. So that's what Rav Ginsburg has done. He's taken this Torah right here of this process called Hachna'ah, Havdalah, and Taka, and he uses it all the time to explain so many different things. So we're very blessed that we could learn it from the Keter Shem Tov. The next one we're going to do is Lamed Daled, the 34th teaching. As I've said, I'm not doing all of the teachings. I'm picking out the ones that I think are the most important and appropriate to try to give over. Okay, so he's quoting a statement in the Gemara, excuse me, in the tractate of Menachot, actually the 99th page, excuse me, of Menachot. And the statement is from Reish Lakish, very, very famous sage, who said, Pa'amim shebitula shel Torah ze yisoda. He said what could be interpreted as a very, very controversial statement. He says sometimes the nullification of learning Torah is its foundation. So immediately we could say, what does he mean here? What kind of a statement is it that sometimes nullifying our connection to Torah, our learning of Torah, our focus on Torah is its foundation? So the Baal Shem Tov now explains. Excuse me. Chaim. He explains like this. Dichtiv asher shibarta. So he brings the quote when God says to Moshe, he's reminding Moshe about the first tablets of the law that Moshe broke. And it says that you broke, asher shibarta, that you broke. And we know from the sages, from Rashi, Melamed de Amar le HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yesher kochacha shibarta, that even though it just sounds like a simple statement, the luchot that you broke, but since the words asher shibarta sound very much like Yesher kochacha shibarta, God says to Moshe, good job, Moshe, that you broke them. I give full consent to what you did. So the Gemara asks, and the Baal Shem Tov, Vahu Tamoa, this is surprising. Why would God say, good job, Moshe, that you broke the tablets? And here he's returning to the basic statement because here Moshe broke the tablets. They're gone. And yet God comes and says, you did right, Moshe. So that is call it an example of this idea that sometimes the nullification of Torah is its foundation. This is a very, very deep matter. What was Moshe trying to accomplish here by breaking the Luchot? There are many, many different opinions. The Slonim Rebbe brings a very good explanation, is that when Moshe came down and he saw them dancing around the golden calf, when he was on the mountain, God already told them they're worshiping a golden calf. And it didn't say that Moshe broke the tablets then. He comes down with the tablets, and when he sees them dancing around, he understands that they are so far gone. It's not just they're like somewhat passively worshiping idols, like they're really into it. And so he understood, I have to do something radical to like break the energy here, to wake them up to what they're doing. And so Moshe broke the tablets, and it was like shock therapy, and it worked. It worked. It like broke a spell. The people were like in a spell, and breaking that was actually a positive thing. So that's an example of how can it be that nullification of Torah is its foundation. Because Moshe understood that if they go any farther here, like what's going to be left of the Torah? So this Torah continues. Well, Perush HaBesht, and the Baal Shem Tov explained with another example of V'hachayot Ratzo V'shov, that the angels were running and returning. This again comes from the same vision of Ezekiel that we quoted the word chashmal from a few minutes ago. There, Ezekiel sees certain angels running and returning. And this is explained that he saw the very dynamic of all creation. All creation is this dynamic of expansion and contraction, AC, DC, the tides going forward and pulling back, the moon going through its waning and waxing, people having high moments and low moments, the pulse of blood through our veins, the heart beating, breathing in and out. All of this is what's called Ratzo V'shov, running and returning. Baal Shem explains, why did he bring this as an example? Lefi shekol davar mitlahev l'shuv l'sharsho. Because every entity in this world, including human beings, are inspired to return to their source. So no matter how much you run, you will always be drawn back to your source. L'kach ayidei achila v'shtiya v'esek maseh v'matan mitbatel adam milimud Torah. So when a person is eating and is drinking and is doing business, at that moment, he is not involved with learning Torah. Be'avodah Hashem, that kind of avoda. Az nachei haneshama mitlahavuta u'mitchazeket l'shuv l'devekut yoter elyon. So it appears that a person is nullifying their connection to Torah. I'm eating now, I'm drinking now, I'm whatever, I'm working in my garden, I'm doing the dishes, I'm not involved in learning Torah right now. But he says that's the ratzon. A person is temporarily not involved with Torah. But what will the result be? The result will be is that after not being involved with the Torah, that a person will again be inspired and aroused even stronger than before to return to learning Torah. Ubizeh Amar Razal, and this is what the sages meant. Pamim shebetula shel Torah ze yisoda, that sometimes the nullification of Torah is its very foundation. Besod achayot ratzon v'shov, in the secret of the angels were running and returning. So of the dynamic of ratzon v'shov, I mentioned, sometimes we're feeling really good. Sometimes we're not feeling so good. Sometimes we feel close to Hashem, close to the Torah, easy to pray, easy to do mitzvot. And other times we struggle. We're just not in that space. We're not in the mood, whatever it is. A human being's psyche is a dynamic of running and returning. And so the Baal Shem is explaining that even when we are not into it, we're not feeling like it, or other things are occupying ourselves, that it's only a matter of time that the pendulum will swing around. But when it swings around, we'll want to learn and pray even more than before. And that's what Reish Lakish meant when he said that sometimes the nullification of Torah is its yesod, because we're not machines. We're human beings, and human beings have their ups and downs, have their moods, have their circumstances that make it easy and sometimes hard to focus, concentrate, and whatever. The one comment I want to make here is that it's almost like there's a slight contradiction of what we've learned before. And that is when again, the Baal Shem Tov, it's reported that he said something. And that's the importance of not taking things out of context, because in an earlier Torah, we learned this idea of b'chol derachecha de'ehu. In all of your ways, know him. Meaning, well, the same things we mentioned here, eating and drinking and being involved in business, that there we're not learning Torah. But the Baal Shem Tov says, maybe we're not learning Torah then, but that doesn't mean that it's not a legitimate way to connect to Torah, connect to God at that very moment. In all of your ways, know him. So here we see something very, very important. It's actually extremely important, because a lot of times, let's take the Talmud. The Talmud is an enormous composition of different ideas. And sometimes, and there's so many ideas presented in the Talmud, many ideas are agreed to, many are rejected. This sage will say this about a subject, another sage will say something completely different. And there's always the danger of isolating different statements and taking them out of context and not seeing the full picture. So here in this Torah, the way that this person gave it over, it might appear that if you're eating and drinking and doing business and those kinds of actions, then you are nullifying being connected to the Torah. But in another statement, the Baal Shem really said quite the opposite, is that every situation every circumstance, every possibility of things that people do is a way to connect to God. And so connecting to God is part of Torah. So if you isolate these statements, you won't make a place for the other one. And so they're both true. There are times that we are, as it were, nullifying our connection to Torah. We're too busy with other things. Someone's at work, they have to concentrate on their work, and they're not thinking about Torah, and they're spending, let's say, 8 hours at work and completely not connected. But if this person wasn't earning a living and could not provide for himself or herself and family, then a person certainly wouldn't be in the mood to be learning Torah and doing mitzvot. Im ein kemach ein Torah. If there's no livelihood, there's no Torah, because a person is like so worried about not having livelihood. How can they concentrate on Torah? So this is just an interesting understanding here, that there's two sides here. There are times that we are nullified from Torah, but that could be because working is also a mitzvah. And so really we're not completely divorced from Torah and mitzvot by earning a livelihood. So we have to balance these two different Torahs from the Baal Shem Tov. Next is Lamed Zayin, 37. This is a very, very interesting one. This shows again how the Baal Shem Tov can take a certain concept and then apply it to a certain verse or incident or story in the Torah in a way that we might never have thought of. So listen what he does here. So here he starts, the Baal Shem Tov talks about Inyan Milta de B'techuta, Kodem Halimud. Here the Baal Shem Tov is discussing this idea of what's called saying something humorous before learning. There's the example that's brought is in the Talmud. One of the greatest sages, Rabbah, would always, and he would have hundreds of people coming to all of his discourses, and he would always start with a light, I won't call it a joke, but a light, humorous statement or story to like lighten the atmosphere. And many, many people follow this. Many, many well-known speakers follow this idea before they get into like heavy subjects or deep subjects, profound subjects. Begin with something lighter, more humorous. So the Baal Shem Tov wants to talk about this. And now what's interesting is he brings the very same idea from Ezekiel. Chayot Ratzov V'Shov. The angels were running and returning. So you see in Chassidut, this concept of Ratzov V'Shov is so important because it's the basic dynamic that runs through all of creation. Ha'adam b'sod katnut v'gadlut. So he said when it comes to a person, the terminology of the Arizal, which the Baal Shem Tov uses very often, is what's called the secret of small-mindedness and expanded mindedness. It's called katnut v'gadlut, small and large, small-mindedness and large or expanded consciousness. V'ayidei asimcha umilta debechuta yotzei mekatnut legadlut lilmod uledavek bo yitbarach. So he says it wasn't that Rabbah or others just like to tell humorous ideas. The idea is that by beginning in a congenial, soft, human, humorous kind of way, it actually helps a person go from small-mindedness to be ready for an expanded consciousness in order to learn and to cling to God. That's what the Baal Shem Tov says. You know what it's like? Here's an example. Let's say you're going to a teacher you've never heard before. And there needs to be some chemistry. And let's say the teacher just starts like plowing into the subject, doesn't relate directly to the audience, just kind of like just jumps into the whatever he wants to teach. So it's kind of like an obstacle to feeling a closeness to this teacher. But if a teacher begins with pleasant words, it doesn't have to be a joke or even humorous, but begins with pleasant words and very personal, it helps a person be in tune and have the chemistry with this teacher to be able to be open to hear what they're saying. So then he brings an example that v'hinei trei batchei shayu mafkichin tsar adam al yedei milta debechuta. So here, v'az yochlu lekarvo ulahaloto. So there's a story. I believe he's referring to a particular story in the Torah, where one of the sages was in the marketplace, and he was at a very high level, and he was in communication with Eliyahu Navi. And he asked Eliyahu, is there anyone here who merits the world to come? And Eliyahu Navi points to two men who were over there talking to a group of people. And so they went over there like, why do they merit the world to come? And they saw that these two people were telling humorous stories, and the people were very, let's say, entertained, very into listening to this person. And then they drew them close to the Torah. And so Eliyahu says, these people, they have a place in the world to come. Because again, the use of humor here isn't for humor's sake. It's to open people up to be connected to their own souls, to Hashem, to the Torah. And now, okay, so the Baal Shem Tov gives over this idea. There's nothing innovative here, because he's just reminding us of what it says in the Gemara, though it's innovative that he's connecting it to this dynamic of Ratzon v'Shov. But then he says like this, V'zeh shekatuv v'yikach et shnei na'arav imo v'et Yitzchak bano. Here, he now refers to when Avram is taking Yitzchak to the Akedah. And it says, along with Yitzchak, there were two youngsters. According to tradition, it was Eliezer and Yishmael. So how is this connected to what we've just learned about saying words of humor? So he says, Ki al yedei haschok l'shem shemayim yachol la'alot hashnayim shel na'arov gam kein imo. So he says that this is like very, very creative, his connection here. Because again, it says, and Avram took the two youngsters with him and Yitzchak. And what happened, though, is that when they got to close to Har Moriah, and Avram sees a cloud covering the mountain, and he understood it wasn't just a physical cloud, it was a spiritual presence of God. And he says to Yitzchak, like, do you see what I see? And Yitzchak says, yes, I see the cloud. And then he turned to the other two and said, do you see something over there? And they said, no, they didn't see it. So the Baal Shem Tov is saying, Ki al yedei aschok. Remember the name Yitzchak means, and he will laugh. He will laugh. Why? Because Avram and Sarah, when they were told that they would have a child in their elderly years, at different times, they both laughed. And therefore, Yitzchak is called after that laughter. So the Baal Shem Tov says, Ki al yedei aschok l'shem shemayim yachol la'alot hashnayim ha'na'arot gam kein imo. That by having Yitzchak here, this idea of humor can even lift up the two that didn't see this spiritual vision. One second. Okay. So now in little print, he explains more. So Yitzchak is being brought up what's called la'olah, as an elevation offering. And so the Baal Shem continues and explains that the use of the word na'arav, the youngsters, is not just how old they were. It's talking about a certain level of spiritual maturity that they had, or in this case, really had not reached. And so the Baal Shem Tov says, "But be'inyan zeh shemati et Yitzchak halato la'olah." He was brought as Yitzchak was brought as an elevation offering. Ki al yedei aschok l'shem shemayim ma'aleh kol yemei aschok shel bacharut. That Yitzchak, who was spiritually mature, being with these two that weren't as spiritually elevated, he's saying that the schok, the actual meaning of Yitzchak, has the power to lift up these two youngsters, but really spiritually immature at that point, as an Ola offering, that they also could be lifted up. Yeah, that's what he says. So this is so creative, the way he's reading this verse. I don't think anyone would have read the verse had they not connected it to this whole idea of humor and being personal. So he's saying that we could read it into what's happening here. Okay, we have time for one more short one. Okay, I'm going to end with this one. And it's a one-liner, but that doesn't mean it isn't full of meaning. So so it's like this. Ma'arich b'teva hu devei. Oh, this is Mem Daled. Mem Daled. כשמעריך בתיבה הוא דבקות שאינו רוצה להפריד מאיתו תיבה. It sounds like just a very simple statement. It says, if a person comes upon a word of Torah or prayer, and he extends his focus on this word. In other words, he's reading, and he comes to a certain word, and there's like an attachment to this word, and he doesn't move on. So he says that this action of clinging to this word shows that he doesn't want to move from this word. But what is he really saying here? And this is so important because so many people ask the question, I can't keep up with the prayers. And this is people who read Hebrew very well also, because we know in a lot of shuls, the prayers go very quickly. And for sure, if someone is not that good in Hebrew or doesn't know Hebrew at all and is trying to follow in English, but even someone who knows Hebrew very well, but wants to concentrate more, wants to focus more, but the prayers are going so fast. So the advice that sometimes is given is, on one hand, it's good to keep up with everyone. There is an importance to that. On the other hand, we have to make prayer meaningful to us. So sometimes when we're praying, that instead of trying to say every single word and not getting that much out of it, sometimes it's better that if there's a certain word or verse or verses within a longer section, then take the time. If that's what's meaningful to you, that's what speaks to you, then don't rush through it. And that's really what the Baal Shem Tov is saying here, is that sometimes we need, and again, I'm not discounting the importance to pray as a community and to try to keep up with the prayers. But sometimes we just know it's really not totally possible. And so to make prayer meaningful, it's advisable that if you can't say every word, then choose those words that are meaningful to you, that speak to you, that inspire you, and take the time to focus on them, to think about them, and let them open our hearts and our souls. So that's really a very, very important part of the Baal Shem Tov's teaching. So that's a good place to stop for tonight. We'll end with a blessing that we can take these teachings that we're learning and not just relegate them to an intellectual pastime, but to really find ways to integrate them into our very, very lives.